Good morning, good morning. I sound a bit croaky this morning. I sound very croaky this morning. I haven't got the virus, just so you know. Don't think I'm quite awake yet. There we go. Right. So today's lesson is going to be a little different in that we're not covering any content. I've got my trusty notes with me. Promise, they're there on my slideshow. We've got a different type of lesson today, and it's not going to be easy. I'm not expecting you to get this right away because it's difficult. So this is not saying that you're not intelligent. It's not saying good morning, Shan. Shan, you've got one lesson straight after this, but this will be beneficial for you if you want to stick around. Totally can. These questions are completely different. So the other group have done a different type of question. I'm starting with a different question again for you guys. So there are 3 Cold War questions. I'm going to get straight into it. I know it's not quite 10, or it is 10 o'clock now. There are 3 Cold War questions. Now, these Cold War questions, unfortunately, are completely different. Here comes Fletcher. Hello, boy. Good boy. I've now got both dogs in the room. Bonnie is off camera and so is Fletcher, but they're down there. We've got 3 new types of questions. So in the Germany exam, you obviously had all new questions because it was a brand new course to you. You didn't know about it. But what's really good about that particular exam board, like the 12 marks, so the explain question, you see again twice in your Elizabeth and crime paper. You see the pluck question again in your crime paper. You see a 16-mark question in both your crime paper and your Elizabeth paper, just without the interpretations. All right, so there are some little hooks in your Germany paper that you've got that you will then see later on. Unfortunately, though, your Cold War paper are 3 brand new questions with 3 brand new skills that are literally unique to paper 2, to the Cold War paper. All right. And I know that's got to be a little bit frustrating for you guys, but once you have learned how to do these particular questions, you're gold. That's it. You just need to know them for the Cold War paper. So each of the questions are worth 8 marks. Annoyingly, they're all different. Just to make things annoying. And the first question that you will face is a consequence question. And that's what we're going to look at today. Obviously, because I've got consequence question there. Duh, Miss Martin, duh. And you are really in a fortunate position is that I examined the Cold War paper last year. Had coronavirus not hit, I would be examining it this year. And even though I will be in Qatar next year, I will also be an examiner for it because I really enjoyed marking that paper. So essentially then, question 1 is looking at the consequences of an event. So they will give you a question and I'm going to look at an example one. We'll talk through it together and then I will put the one that I've set you up on the board and I will help you with some points that you could use. I won't exactly do it for you, but we will plan it together so that you can go off and write it. Now, for some of you, this might take the full 75 minutes and you might not complete it. It might take you half an hour. It's going to be one of those that you practice and practice and practice. No matter where you get to, once you have done it, send it me and I will have a look at it for you. Right then, let's talk about consequence questions. So the consequence question will say, explain 2 consequences of the... Right, year 8, chill out. Explain 2 consequences of the. So you're going to need to write about 2 consequences. Now, when you divide them up, they are both worth 4 marks, okay? So you're going to write about 2 different consequences and they're worth 4 marks each. When you join them together, obviously 4 plus 4 is 8. Yes, you can do maths. So they are put together. When then you are talking about two consequences, a big do that you need to do, I'm aware that you just got my Be Kind t-shirt, is that they have to be different. There is no good saying something happened. So, for example, let's say, explain two consequences of Plymouth Argyle's loss to Exeter City. Okay. Well, one consequence could be that it turned the season around and we got promoted. And another consequence could be that it kick-started a run of form. They are two similar things, all right? So they have to be very different. Ultimately, in the Cold War, it's always going to cause tension. If you are ever stuck, you just talk about tension. But you can't say, oh, well, it made them fall out, it caused tension. They're too similar. They've got to be different. They have to be two separate things. So a cause, or a consequence, I should say, even, of Plymouth Argyle's loss to Exeter was, one, it had started the run of form. Brilliant. Two, it changed the mentality. They're different things. I will show you what it looks like more in a question in just a moment. I'm just going to give you the kind of how you tackle this. So, structuring this then, unlike your pluck question, which is obviously the PUK, PLK, all of that, and it's quite in depth, you are going to need to write about 8 sentences for this question, which is really frustrating when your pluck wants so much out of you and this really doesn't. So what you'll do is you'll write me a statement of that consequence. So it'll be very, very brief. And then you explain it in 2 to 3 sentences in much more detail. If you overcomplicate this first sentence, and don't worry, I will show you what I mean. If you overcomplicate this first statement, it then makes your life very difficult in here and you don't have anywhere to go. You want to be as brief as you can here so that you can be as detailed as you can here, if that makes sense. All right. So the more specific you are with your evidence, the more marks you will get. So if you can include a statistic, if you can include a key figure, if you can include a date with an event, that is all fantastic. If you can't, don't panic. But the more specific evidence that you use to support your argument, the more likely you are to get those 8 marks. Here we go. And the last little tip before we actually look at a question. Now, immediately when I start talking or introduce a consequence question to a year group, usually it is year 9, they go, oh, so it's the bad things then. Now, that's not your fault. That is, not even our fault. That's kind of, as a society, we see consequences as a negative thing. And just to kind of take the example, again, this is no criticism of our school, but in our school, you have rewards and consequences. You have house points and C1, C2, C3, so on and so forth. So that's obviously the C is the consequence. Now, that is absolutely fine. Yes, consequences can be negative. They can be bad. But when you're looking at the Cold War, a consequence is effectively something that happens as a result, something that happens after something else. So if I was to, well, here you go. If I was to say something mean to my sister, so that's a negative thing, she might then punch me in the face. That's a negative consequence. What? Yeah. There you go. My sister said yes. If I compliment my sister and say she looks beautiful, she looks, I like her outfit, she may then give me a hug in response. Yeah. I'm getting yes. That's a positive consequence. So each action has a reaction, if that makes sense. And when we are looking at the consequences in the Cold War, your action might be negative, your action might be positive. But both a positive and negative action can cause a positive or a negative reaction, or both. All right. So please don't get yourself in the mindset of consequence, what bad happened, what happened, because there might actually not be anything. There are events in the Cold War where a really bad thing happens, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and really good things happen out of it, like the world doesn't die. All right. So that is what we're looking at today. So you're probably thinking, Miss, that's all great, you telling me these tips and whatever, but what do these actually look like? Miss Martin has got your back. Right, this is going to be the fun bit, because this has not been wiping off my board. While I'm just wiping off my board, I have written all of these tips and tricks into the PowerPoint that I've attached to your work today on Teams and Show My Homework. And it is like a little explanation of what you should be doing, how you should be doing it, with some example questions on there for you. And I have written them myself. So if they've got bad grammar, blame Mrs. Goy. I know I can say that because she won't be watching. So if there's any spelling mistakes or any grammatical errors, it's Mrs. Goy's fault, even though I wrote them. Right then, let's have a look at the one that I've done, that I prepared earlier, like I'm some woman out of Blue Peter. Here we go. Right, you're just going to get my back for a minute. Sorry. Okay, I've put conf because it don't fit on my board. We're going to look at the Potsdam Conference. I know we've covered that before, and you're probably thinking, Miss, well, your question you've set is not the Potsdam Conference, but I find it's easier to tell you and show you how to do it on one that we haven't done, that we've covered, but you're not actually being asked to do. So I'm going to show you how to do it, model it in this particular answer, and then I will put on the one that I've actually set you and give you some ideas to help you have a go at this kind of question. So, explain 2 consequences of the Potsdam Conference. Now it says of July 1945, but we can just put Potsdam Conf because that's all I've got room for. Now, the way to tackle this question is to write a very brief statement, as I said before, or a sentence about the consequence to start with. So you want to go very, very brief. So I'm going to use one colour for the first sentence, and then I'll use a different colour for different sentences because Miss Martin loves her colours. Right, so one consequence. You will actually have that as a little starter on your, what's its face? Exam paper. Well done, Miss. Great start. Okay, all I've done here so far is repeat the question. One consequence of the Potsdam Conference. Done nothing particularly difficult here. I've just repeated so the examiner knows where I'm going with this. Here we go. Now we're in my own knowledge. Right, there's my first statement. One consequence of the Potsdam Conference was the breakdown of Truman and Stalin's relationship. Now, I haven't said one consequence of the Potsdam Conference was the fact that Truman was an anti-communist and Stalin was suspicious and paranoid. So it broke down the Grand Alliance, and they had no, they didn't have a relationship, and it caused tension. Because if you say all that, you got nowhere to go. I've been very brief. I've said, okay, Yeah, there was a breakdown of their relationship, but I've not said why, I've not said how, I've not said anything other than there was a breakdown. Really straightforward. If you are having any problems or following along and need any assistance in the chat box would be amazing. So, oh God, look at my chin, it's awful. This is what happens when you get acne, people. It's very straightforward. One consequence of the Potsdam Conference was the breakdown of Truman and Stalin's relationship. State of fact. Everyone with me? Anyone? You can just put a thumbs up emoji, that would be great. Radio silence. Okay, I'm going to carry on. Yay! Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Shan. We got there. They're very quiet. I know. Dear me. Well, they're not quiet in the blooming classroom. So, we've got that statement there. The next bit is... your explanation sentences. Now, if you say 2 to 3, if you're only going to do 2 sentences, they need to be hella detailed, okay? They need to be hella specific. If I would always aim for 3 sentences, because then you cover your back. If you're going above and beyond 2 or 3 sentences, you're doing too much, all right? You're doing way too much. It's got to be specific, but you've got to learn to be able to keep it in, rein it in and keep it very concise. So very, very detailed, but very, all right? So we're talking about their relationship. How am I going to back it up? Right, bear with me a minute. I'm just going to write it up. Okay, first thing of my sentence was Truman was a huge anti-communist. Okay, that's something I talked about earlier. That is specific. Anti-communist, good keywords. I can't spell this. Don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious. Okay, so we've talked about anti-communist and being full of suspicion. So we've got Truman was a huge anti-communist and entered the Potsdam Conference full of suspicion for Stalin. Okay, we've got some specific keywords in there. We haven't actually got any evidence as yet in terms of we're explaining it, but there's no real evidence here. Okay, here's a bit of our evidence now. Full of suspicion, whereas FDR, so we know here is another key player, had previously worked well with the USSR leader at the previous 2 conferences. Okay, that's a bit of evidence there. We know that America had had a good relationship at Tehran and Yalta, and now with the change in leadership, things are going a little bit pear-shaped. Here we go. Here's a nice, excellent bit of specific evidence. Go on, Joe, you can get in there. Now you've got the back of my head. Aren't you lucky? I can't wait to rub this off. great content that you're here for. Sorry. All right, next bit then. So Truman refused to tell Stalin about the testing of the atomic bomb. Here we go. Nice bit of specific evidence there, okay? So the atomic bomb, all right. So we know that the Americans were testing in the July of 1945 of the atomic bomb, and we then by bringing that up to say that Truman had refused to tell Stalin about that shows a specific way of their breaking down of relationship. Again, this anti-communism and suspicion, specific way that they're breaking down the relationship. Excuse me. Although this hasn't got any backed evidence of this bit here, by adding in of talking about how FDR previously worked with Stalin supports this bit up here, as well as then the atomic bomb being a specific piece of evidence for why their relationship broke down. My last little bit. And that's right, suspicion again. Oh. Okay, my last little bit. This led to the suspicions between the two leaders and ignited the arms race. I did write competition, but I couldn't bother to put it on here. Again, that's another specific piece of evidence. I know you guys haven't looked at the arms race just yet. Shan, obviously you are the exception there. I know you haven't looked at the arms race yet, but it is something that you could include. So again, saying that it's now this breakdown of relationship has things that has ramifications, has a consequence, okay, that goes beyond just 1945. It extends it out. Can you see how I did that? Can you see that? Okay, I might not have used loads of specific examples in terms of dates and facts and dates and figures. However, I have used facts and specific events like the atomic bomb, and by referring to the previous conferences, I've managed to bring it all together to explain how Truman's breakdown and Truman and Stalin's breakdown of relationship was a consequence of the conference. Abby, if you're still here, can you put me a thumbs up if that makes sense? Thanks, Shan. I'm hoping I've explained that well enough. Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Shan. You girls are legends. That was Bonnie, if you heard that. Are you bored with the Cold War, Bon? Are you? God, I've got a little audience. Now, you would then go and do that one more time to get your 8 marks. So this here is worth 4 marks. Now, I know it looks like a lot, but 1, my writing's big, and 2, when you actually look at it in, here we go, in the PowerPoint that I've done, bar the orange thing in the middle, that's all it is. And you can see my cracked screen. I do apologise. There you go. It's not too much. Now, you would do that again. Now, for the Potsdam Conference, you could talk about how there was a division of Europe, how they decided to divide Germany into 4. You could talk about the setting up of the United Nations, anything. I just went obviously for a negative because it's a lot easier to do. Negative consequences are always easier to write. Okay. Now, obviously, we would do that again, but I'm not going to do it again because there's no point me write exactly the same thing over. The thing I think would be more useful now is if I write up the question that I've set you as your work today and we plan it together so that you have an idea of what you could potentially talk about. Please excuse me, talk amongst yourselves while I rub the board off. I need some wipes. I'll use the same colours. This board felt like a good investment at the time. I miss my board at work. Right, there we go. My arm workout for the day. Oh, Shannon Abby, you're so cute. Oh, I miss you guys. Here we go. What question have I put for you? Now, because we started doing the Truman Doctrine on Monday, I thought this was probably the best one to do for the end of the week to finish it off. If you're drowning in schoolwork, girls, do what you can in terms for me. You know, I'm in no rush. Just send it as and when you can to me. Please don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just to throw my 2 pence in there. Sorry. But, you know, I'm here, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just send it to me as and when you can. It's never late for me. Don't worry. Right. Let's plan this, shall we? So we've been looking at the Truman Doctrine. So that is just the bit with Greece, that little bit, that policy of containing communism to the east. So you could talk about, oh, that's all right, Shan. You could talk about Greece, how the USA gets involved. Which is a change in foreign policy. Remember, we talked about on Monday how America had kept themselves really isolationist. So that could be, you could talk about how they, a consequence of Truman's containment policies, they get involved in the Greek Civil War. Another one that you could talk about is the Marshall Plan or Marshall Aid. And how the West received $17 billion worth of aid to help rebuild after World War II. That's a consequence. That's quite a positive consequence. Another breakup song. Why is that in my head? Turn it up and on and on. You've also got this one's a little bit more difficult, the division of Europe. Again, it would link, here you'd have to be careful because it would link in Marshall Aid or the Marshall Plan. So you would have to be quite careful with that one. If you'd already talked about the Marshall Plan, you couldn't talk about this. Here we go. You could also then talk about how the Truman policy of containment allows Stalin, or gives Stalin the ammunition to then create his own version of it with Cominform. As well as Comecon, which is the US version of the USSR version of Marshall Plan. Oh, I'm using a big word here. Right, let's explain that last one. The last one that you could potentially talk about then is the heating up of tension. So obviously the Truman Doctrine's policy of containment, keeping the communists in the East and the capitalists in the West, that heats up tension. And Stalin and Truman obviously pass backward and forward a lot of insults, or we call, rhetoric. A good example of that is at the moment, a certain president in the United States, I won't even say his name because I can't even bring myself to say his name, is doing a lot of blah, I would say negative rhetoric about the Black Lives Matter movement or China and coronavirus. So it's that political spiel that leaders come out with. And this heating up of tension, Stalin and Truman come out with a lot of political spiel saying, oh, well, you're doing it for the selfish interest. You're doing it to try and dominate the world, blah, 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 basically. Again, that's another tough one. If it were me, and this came up as a question for me in my exam, obviously, I know I'm a teacher, I get that. But if I was in your shoes, I would personally talk about Greece and how America steps in after Britain can't support the capitalist government anymore, and it changes their foreign policy from being isolationist to getting involved in Europe. And I'd also talk about Marshall Plan. Those top two are the ones I talk about. I'm going to bring it forward a little bit so that you can pause it, take a screenshot. So if it were me, I'll put a little pink star next to him. I would talk about this one and this one, because you can talk about how Britain received a lot of this Marshall aid, $3,176 million, I think they received million dollars, $3,176 million to help rebuild the country in exchange for investing in US companies and having a base on there. So those two are really quite straightforward to talk about. Another one that I would then, if you were feeling like, oh, I don't want to talk about them, you could talk about Comic-Con and Cominform, how it makes Stalin retaliate. That's another good one. These two are much more difficult. Remember, you would say one consequence of the Truman's containment policy was the US involvement in Greece. Boom, done. Britain was helping the Greek government, or the Greek capitalist government after World War II, due to their communist government refusing to accept their loss. This plunged Greece into a civil war, and Britain asked America for help as they could no longer fund it, which America happily agreed to in order to prevent communism spreading. As a result, this made the USA change their foreign policy to be more involved in European affairs as they invested. Where is it? I've got. They don't give you a number. That's all right. As they were able to step in with the necessary financial aid in order to prevent the communists from taking over. Boom, done. Okay. If you need any help, I am here all day. I have got to clean my bathroom. Yeah, that's what it's like as an adult. However, I have my phone on loud and I can still reply to you on Teams, on email, whatever, if you get stuck. Let me know if you need any help. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. I miss you lots. Stay safe, and hopefully the weather will get nicer over the weekend. Right. See you later. Shan, see you in 25 minutes. Bye.